So in this video, I would be discussing about fractal chaos bands and some scalping trades using this technique. Okay, so many times, of course, for traders who are pretty active in the market, sometimes, following few of the techniques, you may not get a lot of entry points based on the techniques that you follow. So in this case, it is purely a scalping technique where you can do for some quick trades, and with minimal stop loss. So that is beauty of this scalping trade. So in this case, what we look at is primarily we look at some stocks which are pretty liquid in terms of volume, etc. That's one of the key factors for this method to work. So if you're applying this method, primarily use look for index, or you can look for some of the stocks which are constituents of index, wherein you have a good amount of volume, right? So now, so for this illustration, I've taken Nifty as an example, the Nifty futures. So we primarily look at 1 minute chart here of Nifty. So in terms of indicators, we primarily need the three indicators. So one is the fractal chaos bands. So fractal chaos bands is nothing but it is a very short term intraday resistances or support levels which are plotted by reducing the noise, right? So that's one of the indicators or bands we'll be using for this method. The second one is vwap. So these are the primarily the two indicators that we would be looking at. So as you can see here, I have the Nifty 1 minute chart. So now let me go to studies and I will add VWAP on this chart. So I let the color in red, and then I will add one more, which is fractal chaos bands, right? So now, so these are the two indicators. In addition to that, I will also add EMA of 100, right? So I'll explain you the concept, why we need this indicator. So I'll probably let this in let's say in blue color. So now this is what you end up with. You have the fractal chaos bands, you have the EMA of 100, you have the VWAP, which is in red color, and the chart is of 1 minute. So now what is the entry criteria here? So the entry criteria primarily is you should look for the price to close either above or below fractal bands, right? So I would rather prefer the band to be narrow when this is happening. I mean, if the band is pretty wide, for example, this I consider as a very wide band. I mean, in this case, I would not be entering the trade. So now here, as you can see, the price has closed below the fractal band here. The price has closed below the VWAP. The price has closed below the EMA 100. So in this case, you actually enter the trade on the next candle, open of next candle, with the stop loss which is above, some ticks above VWAP, right? So now depending on you know depending on whether EMA 100 is above or below, you can take to choose either of this. But one advice here is do not enter into the trade if the gap between these two is pretty huge, right? So for example, when I enter this trade, my entry is around 17,075, and my stop loss would be almost 50 points, right? So now once you enter the trade here, you actually start trailing the stop loss with the VWAP, right? So now as you can see here, from 17,075, eventually Nifty made a low of 16,920, right? So roughly 150 points. So I mean, this is of course one of those occasions where you get a very good returns, but it may not be the case as we're looking at primarily for scalping here. So now it's up to you. Either you can trail the stop loss. For example, you can use EMA 100 as one of the trailing stop losses. In this case, for example, If I continue to hold this trade, I might exit around 16,976 and 975, which is still a good 100 points for a stop loss of 50 points. Now, the beauty of this method is you can get multiple entries during the day. For example, here now we finished one short trade, right? I mean, this trade, I mean, we closed by 11 o'clock in the morning. Now, again, if you look at here, I wouldn't go for, let's say, in this case, I wouldn't go for sell because my, price is still above EMA of 100. So as you can see here, I wouldn't enter even the buy here because it is still below my vwap. So there is no condition satisfying my entry criteria for buy until this point. So as you can see at 145, again the price has broken out of the fractal band, right? And it's above my vwap. It's also above EMA 100. So now here I can enter into a buy trade. In this case, I would prefer my stop loss to be the EMA 100 line because obviously VWAP is very close to my entry point. See, there are different ways you can manage the stop loss. Either you can use the VWAP line as a stop loss, or you can use the lower band of the fractal chaos band as a stop loss, or you could look at EMA 100 as your stop loss. So in this case, my risk is slightly higher if I'm looking for EMA 100 as my stop loss. So here, if you look at it, my entry would be around 17,000 levels, and my stop loss would be 16,969, right? I mean, still it is a good entry. You're entering the long trade with around 30 points of stop loss on the index. Now again, so as you can see here, from 17,000, Nifty made a high of 1779, which is a good 80 points in the intraday trade. So as you can see here, I had two quality trades, one short and one long on the index, and both of them gave very good returns, as you can see. Now the question is, will I enter a short trade here? No, because it's above VWAP as well as EMA 100. Same here. Will I enter a short trade here? No. Will I go for a buy here? Not really, because if you look at the gap, right? My entry would be around 17,050, while my stop loss is again 17,000, around 50 points. So I prefer not to enter the trade here because I would already taken an entry, in this position, right? So I'll be trailing the stop loss in this case. So it's a very effective method, and in this case, since it's a scalping technique, you can actually look at multiple trades on a single instrument during the day. So I'll illustrate this method with another example, which is, let's say, SBA. It can be very effective on SBA as well, stocks like SBA, which is pretty high in liquidity. So now if I look at the SBA chart, it is pretty similar to that of Nifty. So as you can see that there is a close. I mean, the price is closing below the fractal case bonds here, but I wouldn't take this trade because, as I was telling you, the band is very wide for me, right? I would rather wait for subsequent entry points, which is favorable. So now if you had taken an entry here, let's say this is the open of the candle, it's 459 is entry, and my stop loss would have been almost 3 points. So I would skip this trade. Plus, it is happening during the market open, which is expected to be very volatile. So I'll ignore this trade. So when I come to the second opportunity that I get, as you can see here, this is another entry point for short trade. So I would rather enter here because my bands are narrowing down, and then I have both the conditions meeting here in terms of price being below VWAP and EMA of 100. So now here my entry point is 459.25 with a stop loss of 461.9, so which is around 2 rupees 30 paise of stop loss. So with this entry point, with this entry point, let's say 459.3, and as you can see, SBI touched 452, almost 7 rupees on an intraday, which is pretty huge. Although I call it scalping, at times you can kind of get such very good opportunities where you make pretty good amount of money. So the trend is expected to remain strong if you see the EMA line and the vwap line in a very sharp inclination or in an angle, right? As you can see here, they're all pointing downwards, with a very good angle. So let's say the both the lines, I mean the EMA as well as the VWAP were horizontal. You can say that the trend is little sideways, and those kind of trades might not fetch you uh, this kind of return. So it's up to you. Meaning, for example, if the lines are pretty horizontal, you might want to ignore the trade. But in this case, certainly it's a very good opportunity, because as you can see that all the conditions have been met. Plus, the angle with which EMA and VWAP lines are coming down is pretty bearish. So now we get almost 7 points on an intraday trade here on an SBI. So going forward, let's say that again here I wouldn't enter the trade, because obviously it's my stop loss are pretty huge. I wouldn't either enter a buy trade here because the conditions are not been met, right? So now here, for example, on the short trade, if I had to enter here on the short trade, 454 is entry level, and my stop loss would have been 456. While the distance between the VWAP and entry point is reasonable, the concerning point here for me is the EMA line is actually trending upwards, right? I mean, I was telling you that the trend is pretty strong if both the EMA line and the VWAP line is in the direction of the trade. For example, in this case, if you're going for a short trade, I would rather expect the EMA line and VWAP line to be pointing downwards in a good angle. So now here, as you can see, it is bit of a contradiction, because EMA line is pointing upwards. Hence, I wouldn't take this short trade. So the same applies here as well. I mean, my both the EMA line and the VWAP line is almost horizontal. So now coming here, this would have been a good entry point for me, but then unfortunately, I cannot take here because I have to wait for the candle close. So one can enter, the long trade over here, which is around 455.9 levels. As you can see that EMA has started pointing upwards, although it is not a very favorable trade in terms of all the conditions being met. Meaning, for example, here the VWAP line is still slightly trending downwards, right? But you can take a calculated risk here. Your entry would be 455.9, while your stop loss would be 454.6. Now as you can see that from 455.9 we ended up all the way until 459.70. So again, it's a very good trade. I mean, almost 1% returns in this trade. So obviously, we call it scalping, but at times it can give very good returns. So my suggestion would be for all those traders who really look for multiple opportunities for trades during the market hours. This is a very good technique, but please note that do not use this method on stocks which are low in liquidity, right? Either you look for index futures basically, or you can also look at some of the Nifty stocks or the index stocks which are high in volume.